You are listening to another AlwaysMoto production. The AlwaysMoto podcast with your host, David Hogan. This show contains information about injuries to riders competing in AMA Supercross, AMA Motocross, MXGP, Oz Pro MX, and other international moto events. The information discussed may be unsettling to some listeners. It might be incomplete or based on medical opinions due to riders tending to hide the details of their injuries. We are here to explain the information and increase injury understanding and visibility for the fans. There might be coarse language and the odd stuff up along the way. If any of this offends you, turn us off right now.
I'd like to remind you that he is not a doctor.
That's right, Moto fans, I'm not a doctor, but I am a physiotherapist, and this is episode 34 of the AlwaysMoto podcast. As always, I'm your host, David Hogan, the physiotherapist from Australia, Newcastle to be specific, and we'll be looking forward to the round of Australian Supercross in Newcastle coming up here in a couple of weeks because we won't have to travel. Yay! Welcome to the AlwaysMoto podcast. We are in the depths of the clinic throwing strapping tape anywhere it will stick. As always on this show, we'll be going through all things moto, particularly the injuries in our sport because #injuries are a part of moto. This week, we'll be talking WSX from Melbourne. I was there in person, in the flesh. Yes, I made it somehow, some way. We'll also be going to the emergency department for the World Supercross injuries and the Aus Supercross injuries that have started from the first two rounds, the Aussies that happened in Melbourne before the World Round, and then again last weekend in Adelaide. We'll also have Dave's diatribe. I've got a good one this week. You better stick around and listen to this. And we've got a news segment this week that we're going to call Industry Whispers. It won't happen every show. We're going to mix it in and out with a different news segment that we'll have coming maybe next time that will be medical jargon explained. But this week it's going to be Industry Whispers, so stick around for that one as well. And we've got an interview to finish off the show from Aus SX racer Conor Tierney. We had a chat with him about his injury that happened in the first qualifying session, second time on the track for the Oz Supercross round in Melbourne. He didn't get very far, so we've got to chat with him about his injury, see how he's coping. So another big show coming your way, but now we have an affiliate deal in place to partly bring you this show for the time being. We've got Slantboard Guy has offered a 10% discount for AlwaysMoto podcast listeners. So if you want to get your squats on point in the gym, improve your standing technique on the bike with stronger legs, this simple equipment piece is for you. Use the code AlwaysMoto in lowercase at checkout and check the link in the to purchase from in our show notes or in our bio on Instagram. Now, this is a very simple piece of equipment that you will use in the gym to change your standing position whilst you're doing your squats, your lunges, and whatever else you can come up with on the board to improve your ability to do a deep squat. So check it out, guys. We're going to have an AlwaysMoto inspection on it soon, but we are getting a kickback from any purchases from Slantboard Guy via the link or using the AlwaysMoto code. So please use AlwaysMoto lowercase at the checkout or use the link that's available in the show notes to help support us and support Slantboard Guy. But as always, the rest of the support, we still need you to keep helping us to keep the lights on here at the AlwaysMoto podcast. We still have our merch available to help the show. We have AlwaysMoto t-shirts available now. They're $25 plus postage and handling, and that's in Australian dollars. We also now have an international drop ship set up so we can get some of our US-based listeners some t-shirts as well at a cheaper posting rate. So get in touch with us about that. If you're a US-based listener, please give us an email at alwaysmoto2019@gmail.com to get your t-shirt ordered via our dropship setup. and that way we can get some of those over to you guys in the States for much cheaper than we had been able to do so far. So support the shows, rock the t-shirt at your next race that you're going to, and get us out and about and visible in the moto scene. We also have another option now. We want you to support the show directly. If you can send any donations to the AlwaysMoto PayPal account, drop a message or a question in the notes and we'll read it out live on the show. So send that, just search AlwaysMoto in your PayPal. We'll pop up with our logo there. Send us any amount possible. That'd be fantastically appreciated. And like I said, drop a question or some sort of message and we'll read it out live on the next show to get you out there. So thank you. We appreciate your support on that. So let's jump into the show now. We've got WSX Talk in Melbourne. I've got to tell you, that was a fantastic event for me. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get there. I ended up taking a last-minute flight on Saturday morning. Pretty much on Thursday night, I said, screw it, I'm going. Backing the idea that my doctor on Friday morning was going to clear me to allow to fly based on my injuries myself. From my blood clot that I had in the lungs. It's been cleared from a scan earlier that week, so I took the punch. She was going to let me fly. She did. So I booked the flight Thursday night. I got cleared Friday morning. Saturday morning we flew out. So we missed the Friday night for the Aussie round, but that was okay. We managed to catch up with a few of those guys on the Saturday. So we got to pick up our media credentials Saturday morning. We pretty much spent all day floating around in the pits, talking to the different mechanics, the riders, the team managers, and anyone in between. We were able to catch up with some old friends that hadn't seen for a while, that were still working the events. We met some of the industry media that we hadn't previously met in person before. Got to say Anton from Swap Moto stopped me and said hi. That was pretty cool. Didn't get to chat to him too much, but he recognized the logo and came and said hi. That was fantastic. Appreciate that, Anton. Hopefully we can catch you again soon. But yeah, we had a really good day. And look, it was awesome to chat with some of these people in the paddock. We managed to meet Mike Jones, who was Cole Seeley's mechanic for the Moto Concepts team there. We got talking to him about some 125s, and he's got a Trick YZ 125 that he had back home, and I was comparing notes with him about my RM125 build that you listeners probably have seen me use for some of my test shots when we're doing inspections. So we had a good chat with him, talked about Cole's setup and Cole's bike, and just a really nice guy, down to earth, really, really easy to chat to. We also got to meet Courtney Lloyd in person, who's the team manager for Club MX. And look, really big thank you to Courtney. She took me in, gave me some food and drink, and was open to chatting to us basically all the time throughout the day. We sat with her at different times in the industry section, watching the guys do their track time. It was really cool just to meet her and the team, and also spends a bit more time with Grant Harlan, who we interviewed on one of the previous shows as well. So that was really cool. Got to meet some of the HEP or the PMG, they're basically the same thing, the Pipes Motorsport Group's team. They're the Suzuki guys. We managed to meet Derek Kelly, who was very, very much a smart dude. I knew of his brand True Fusion. It's a bit of a medicinal, it's not really medicinal, but that sort of health product line where he's got some creams or lotions for muscles and different supplement side of things. And he talked me through a few things, and he knows what he's talking about, and he's very good at it, and he's mixing this stuff up himself at home as a way to supplement his income. So he needs some support, and we're hopefully going to get him on a show in a few weeks' time to talk about what he's up to pre-season and what True Fusion is all about. But he was really cool. We got to spend some time with him I sat with him and his parents watching the 450 main event and watched that go through. And they're really cool people. It was their first time in Australia, so it was pretty interesting to talk to them about their experiences as well. But while we're in that pit there with the PMG Suzuki guys, we managed to meet Alex Ray, who's quite a funny character. Didn't take long for him to realize who I was and what I was doing, and obviously the injury updates. And next thing you know, we're flicking through his phone, checking out all of his wrist x-rays, and he's telling me about what's going on. And I've got to say, there's not many bones left in his wrist. He's had a few removed now and had some stabilization process work done. And look, in my opinion, from where he was at with that recovery process, he was already on track racing Supercross, and he only been released a few days earlier. Literally, I think it was a week, not even. I think it was a bit early for him to be doing that. But anyway, he was doing it, and he did all right, apart from the fact he got a concussion off a start line in the mains later on in the night. But he was a very interesting dude, and found it quite funny. I came into the pits after the main events to find him, to find some information on him, because I thought he'd be out of hospital or something along those lines. And there he is in street clothes, yelling out, "Hey, the injury dude, I got an update for you." And so we had a chat about how his concussion was and how he was feeling, and he's a really nice guy. It was pretty cool to meet Alex Ray, having listened to a fair bit of his stuff on the other US media-based outlets. It was awesome to see him in person and actually get to chat to him. We also caught up with Jamie, the MDK team manager. Super chill guy, but was pretty interesting considering how chill he was with the injury list that he had for his MDK team. Funny story with him, but that he was already, we sort of discussed about what he would be doing next year in terms of fill-ins, because for them to fill in the two riders for this Australian round, it was pretty easy because obviously they'll come into Australia, the Supercross rounds were already going on, and they could just pick from the Aussie guys. But what happens when they go to some place like Saudi Arabia or Indonesia or something crazy next year, and they don't have somebody based there in the field straight away that they could just pick from and put on their bike? And he actually came up with the idea that he thinks he's going to have sort of, he said 10 to 15, but I think that's probably a bit of a stretch. He's probably going to have more like 5 dudes to begin with at least, stationed around the world. So he said Australia, France, and US, that would be able to go over to the US at some point, get a base setting on one of their bikes, and be basically on a like a holding contract, so that they would be available for them to call into the ranks if they needed to have a fill-in rider at some point during the year. So they would basically be able to have them onto a bike, have a base setting, and get them, have them reasonably comfortable straight away and just fill in for one race if that's needed, because there is that fine system in place with the World Supercross events that means they have to have riders on track. So, and we found out, we think that fine amount is in the range of 50K. So it's a reasonable amount to make these guys get somebody in place. And so to have a couple of guys around the world on a bit of a holding contract would not be a silly idea, and something that I could see many teams doing next year with the expanded rounds, and just being able to make sure they can fulfill their contract arrangements for riders on track. So be interesting to see what that happens. But Jamie was pretty open with us about all that sort of stuff and showing us through and meeting some of the other guys on the team, which was cool. So I appreciate that, Jamie. It was awesome. Didn't get to one person I wanted to talk to, but I sort of shied away from it at one point. Didn't get to chat to Phil Nicoletti at the Club MX there. At one point, he wasn't there when I first was meeting Courtney and Grant Harlan, but at one point I came back after one of the qualifying sessions for the 250 class, knowing that he'd be there. And he pulled into the pits and basically took the helmet off, threw it down on the table, walked into the back section where he couldn't be seen, and all you could hear was a few profanities going. So I thought, that's the usual Phil that I've heard about, but I'm not going to get involved with that one right now, so I'll leave it be. I'll catch him on the next time around. But it was pretty interesting to see that Phil is Phil no matter what and who and where. So that was pretty cool to see and be a part of. And obviously I got to talk to some of the other team about the situation, and it was just a bit heated from a few things that happened in qualifying, which is, from what I understand, a normal thing for Phil. So anyway, that was pretty cool. We got to do a bit of a tour of the Race Safe truck, that is the medical truck that goes to all the Australian Pro National rounds, and it's there for the Aussie Supercross rounds as well. And we got to meet a couple of they're all volunteers except for the owner, Simon, and so they're all different sorts of qualifications. There's obviously John, the physio, who volunteers at most of the rounds, and he just does the physio side of things, so taping or massage as such between rounds, or between sessions on track as needed. But then there's also the high level guys, and there was an emergency nurse that took me through the truck and explained, that they're all volunteers. They fly in, they've got their travel and whatnot covered, but they're volunteering their time to be there for the event to do this medical procedures that pop up along the way. And it was awesome to see they have 2 full bays in this truck that can do basically administer IV pain relief and some other bits and pieces along the way, some minor procedures, stitching or such. But it was cool to have that little access point for that truck, and it's awesome that we have that level of medical care on site for our rounds. And just, awesome to have them there, but really just a nice understanding to see what's available in that truck, and hopefully at times maybe into the next year, we might be able to have a bit more of an in-depth look and do just a podcast around just that itself. So we'll see how that all goes. But yeah, it was interesting to get some time in there, and understand that they can do a lot of stuff before they even have to hand over to an ambulance while the ambulance is, attending to the venue or something along those lines. So that was cool. One other thing that was pretty interesting on the night, got to meet Carlos from GoPro Australia, and he was there, and it was funny. The GoPros were back on helmets, and I was a bit shocked, and he was there fitting them, and I asked him what the go was, and he said, yep, they've all been allowed for this World Supercross round, and Kenny and Dino were running them. They had to sign some release paperwork to do that, but they were back on top of the helmets, which was interesting to note. It's been something that had been banned in Australia and cut out in US rounds as well. So interesting to see that they're back on top of the helmets and on top on that spot that usually has, not tucked under the visor as such. One was, I think that was Dino's, but Kenny's was definitely straight on top of the helmet. So interesting to see those back. But they've got GoPro's got a new version coming out. It's the Mini 11 or something, I think it was, and they'll be out soon. So it'll be cool to see how they go. But it was interesting to meet Carlos and see that the GoPros are back on helmets again. So the event was awesome. Look, generally speaking, it was well organized, well run, pretty good theatrics with the fireworks and all that sort of business. From the racing side of things, I still feel that those main events are just too short and too hectic with that 3-race format. I think I'd rather see something like a 2-race format where there's like a 10-minute or so main event for each one to try and just give the riders a bit more chance to mellow out. It seemed like there was just so much carnage in those shorter races, especially the 250 class, because guys were just trying to get to the front knowing that they didn't have much time, and it sort of ruined the races for each race, basically, for Cole Seeley and Kyle Chisholm. They just kept getting taken out by guys that were rushing it in the first and second corners. And that's not something that those two guys are used to, because they're used to longer events. They would just settle into the race and sort of work their way forward. But that didn't happen because of this hectic schedule. So I think there needs to be something that will need to change. I don't think they'd be able to run that 3-moto format across 8 or 9 rounds that they might be trying to do next year. So they might have to have multiple formats, and it'd be interesting to see what those end up being. So, but I think there'll be some change to that, for next year. But they definitely gave them more time between the races. I was timing it, and they sort of had definitely 5 minutes, and then before the super final, it was out to sort of 8 minutes. So it's they'd made some changes from Cardiff even to Melbourne, so that was good to see that they were trying to improve it that quickly. But yeah, it was a very busy schedule with that main event format there, and just not enough time, especially even just sitting in the stands. It just was busy. But yeah. And the last thing that I'll touch on now, I managed to get, and everyone's probably seen all this stuff already, but the Brayton freeze incident in the pits afterwards, I was lucky enough. I was talking to Brayton's mechanic, Sean Lukowski, earlier in the night after that after the third main event, when Justin and Freeze were in the main press conference still. Something that I just sort of didn't get to. I was more interested in talking to a few of the other guys that weren't on the podium as such. So I was down in the pits already. So I was talking to Sean there, and managed to get one of Justin's side panels off his Honda there, which was pretty cool. And I said to Sean, look, I'll come back in a little bit when Justin's back. I'd love him to sign it so I can pop it up in the studio, which I've done, and just get him, sign it and then try and get an interview with him. And he's like, yeah, man, come back, you'll be here shortly, sort of thing. So about 20 minutes or so later, I came back and spotted that Justin just turned up. So I went in and said, hey, Justin, David from AlwaysMoto, man, Sean gave me a shroud. I'd love you to get a signature for it for the studio. But if you got a chance, I'd love to do an interview. And I hadn't realized at that point that there was an incident between Freeze and Brayton that was going to blow up right there and then. And he said, yeah, man, I'll do the interview. And I'm like, he looked in his face and he's like, he looked angry. And I'm like, you all good, man? He's like, yep, I'll just talk in the interview. It's all good. All right, sweet. So I, did the intro, started. And as you would have heard, I've got that posted up there in our podcast feed, the interviews post-race. He got pretty heated about the situation with Freeze trying to pay Grant Harlan to take him out, and then Freeze ended up taking him out anyway, and he just was a bit dirty on the fact that was what was done. And then I managed to close out that interview, kept Justin on track, and seemed to have a professional but obviously heated interview, which was fine. It was good. I didn't want him to obviously go off the reservation and lose it, but kept him on track. And then I sort of just decided that this is going to get weird in a second. So I hung around the Moto Concepts pit, and I was talking to Mitchell Oldenburg. I talked to Cole Seeley, and just was hanging around just to see what was going on. And then Freeze and Brayton Freeze turned up, and then it just sort of went boom. Freeze and his girlfriend were having a go at Justin and his mechanic Sean about the whole scenario, and it sort of got to a point they were just arguing and sort of felt like there might have been a punch thrown at one point. It didn't happen, but that's sort of where it sort of felt like it was escalating to. But then I think Justin was the bigger man at that point and said, look, man, just go away. You don't need to be here. It's done. Forget about it. Walk away. And Freeze sort of took 2 or 3 steps away and then came back at him. And then, Justin said, look, man, just leave. And the same sort of thing happened. It happened about 3 or 4 times. You tell him to leave, Freeze would take 3 or 4 steps. His girlfriend would get 3 or 4 more steps away and tell him to hurry up. And then Freeze would just turn around and go again. And funnily enough, the World Supercross crew, I gather, had brought down trays of beer for each team, basically. They just sat them on these pit setups. So the front of the pit setup was a half wall, had a nice big front shelf sitting on it, so they just lined up beers on it so that the team could have a few beers at the end to celebrate the pilot series being complete. Well, there would have been 10 or more beers just sitting on this thing, on this front wall right near the team's truck where Freezy and Brayton were arguing. And next thing you know, Freezy just picks one up and just chucks it at Brayton. And I'm like, whoa, that was out of line. And Brayton, to his credit, and Sean, his mechanic, to their credit as well, didn't do anything. They just told him to leave, and they walked away themselves, and that was the end of it. But it was just a very interesting situation. They were and Freeze's girlfriend was yelling that they were ringing Tony, and Tony Alessi was going to come down and chat to them all, and he turned up later on and just basically instructed everybody to pack up the pits and get out of there. There was not too much else said after that point, but I felt sorry for Mike, Cole's mechanic, and Mitchell Oldenburg, because they sort of were trying to help pack up Cole's bike into the crates that they had for this World Supercross series as this was going on. And they both sort of just crept out of the pit and came around to the front of the pit and over to one side and sort of just put their head down on the front wall there of the pit area and just sort of were standing next to me. And I'm like, you guys are right. And they're like, oh, it's just a bit embarrassing, really. I was like, yeah, pretty much. I would be in that same situation. And they just wanted to get out of there, obviously, too. They didn't want to be involved in it if they could help. So weird situation there to finish the night for the Moto Concepts guys. Could have been a world championship. Ended up just with a beer on Brayton's shirt at the end of the night from Freeze. So look, not how you should go racing, but an interesting situation all the same to be standing there watching, in the World Supercross pit area. So yeah, that's how it goes down sometimes. But look, overall, the event was awesome. I'm happily go back next year, especially now that I know how to get in and out of that stadium, which we'll hear about a bit more later on. And I just look forward to seeing more of these races, 8 to 10 of them in 2023 for World Supercross, because I think it will be a good thing, and all the riders that were there seemed to enjoy themselves and wanted to be back. So why not do more? All right, let's take a break on the AlwaysMoto podcast, and we'll be back with the emergency department.
Hey guys, this is Grant Harlan, and this is the AlwaysMoto podcast.
All right, guys and girls, we're back. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking around on that short break there. Now, let's jump into the emergency department. The emergency department. All the injuries, all the gory details, and when they'll be back on track. It's the list you really don't want to be on. That's right, you do not want to be on this list at all. But unfortunately, most of you end up on it at some point, which sucks. But anyway, that's how Moto goes, right? Hashtag injuries are a part of Moto, and hashtag injured Moto life. All right, let's jump into the World Supercross injuries from round 2. And unfortunately, there was a few of them. So let's go straight into the list. Pipes Motorsport Group, as we mentioned earlier, Alex Ray managed to get a concussion on the start when he collided with his teammate Freddie Noren on one of the mains. He was okay after the event and he'll be fine. He spoke to us, like I said earlier, in the pits afterwards. He'll be fine. He'll be back training already. Freddie Noren also missed out on the super final. He had another crash early, bruised up a shoulder. He was just precautionary. I think he had enough of crashing that night. So he pulled off early as well, but he'll be fine. He'll be back training as well. Luke Clout for that CDR Yamaha team. Unfortunately, he didn't even get to race the second round in Melbourne. He broke his thumb the night before in the Australian Supercross round and didn't end up getting to race the World Supercross round. He was there. He rode on for opening ceremonies, but that was it. He's been operated on already. I would expect that he's out for the series, but in talking to Luke's parents and Luke and Aaron, his mechanic, all the Clout family there, I got a funny feeling that Luke's going to try and rush this back after he's had that surgery to stabilize it, which would probably not be advisable, but would possibly be possible. A small fracture, like the small bones when they're fractured, they take around that 4 to 6 weeks mark. He's had that operated on. He will be exactly 4 weeks to the next round in Newcastle from that point. So it will be touch and go. I wouldn't be surprised if he's there. I definitely wouldn't be surprised if he's not, put it that way. So we'll have to see what Luke does, but ideally he'd be out for the season and just recovering, trying to get ready for whatever he's got next in 2023. MDK Motorsports, got to say, what a shit show for injuries in this World Supercross pilot series for them. We all know that Chad Reed and Josh Grant had issues at round 1. Well, at round 2, they lost Derek Drake to a broken wrist in qualifying. They had organised a fill-in for Josh Grant and Chad Reed. So they had Joel Whiteman and Jackson Richardson. Unfortunately for Joel, he managed to break his wrist and his ankle in qualifying for the World Supercross round and didn't end up getting to race for the team. And then Jackson Richardson ended up being the last man standing for the team because in the SX2 class, Justin Bogle went down and disappeared without a trace as such. When I got back to the pits for their setup, their team was already packed up and gone. So I had no information from the team or on Justin, and I haven't been able to get an update from them since. So yeah, Justin was out as well. So basically, like I said, Jackson Richardson, who was a fill-in, ended up being the last man standing in the round 2 there for them. The other teams seemed to escape okay. The wild card that didn't end up being a wild card was Brett Metcalf. He was meant to be there for the wild card ride in Melbourne, but unfortunately in a heat race on the Friday night for the Australian Supercross round managed to break his collarbone, so he was out, and then it ended up being Hayden Melross filling in as the wild card. So that was an interesting scenario there, but that's the updates from World Supercross. All of those guys will obviously, in terms of World Supercross rounds next year, they would be fit and healthy by whenever that series kicks off. But we don't even know who's going to be on teams and whatnot for next year at all this stage. So no predictions on when they're returning, if they're returning, all that sort of stuff like we would do at other times. But that's our World Supercross list for the emergency department. Let's jump into the Australian Supercross rounds now. We've had 2 already. We had the round 1 at Melbourne on the Friday night before the World Supercross round. We've also then the week later had round 2 at Adelaide, which was only a couple of days ago. And there's been a couple of injuries in both of those rounds. We had some unfortunate ones early on. We had Conor Tierney, who you'll hear from later. He's dislocated a hip. We had Bailey Malkowitz. He dislocated an ankle that also had a couple of fractures in that ankle region, and he's waiting on what he can do next, which will possibly be surgery. Haruki Yokoyama, who rides for that Empire Kawasaki team, he managed to dislocate his shoulder at round 1. But he was able to race round 2 in Adelaide, so he must be okay. He's probably done this a few times before by the sound of it, and was able to just get things back in and deal with it for round 2. Obviously, Brett Metcalf, like we mentioned, collarbone at round 1, missed out on the World Supercross round. He's had surgery already, so he is also a tiny chance to be back for the Newcastle round, but it's a tiny chance. Again, it's a 4-week turnaround. It's possible. He's had it plated. Will he risk it? Don't know. He's an older guy. Does he need to? Probably not. Does he want to? Maybe. We'll have to see what happens with Brett Metcalf if he does turn up for round 3 of this Aussie Supercross series in Newcastle or not, but we'll wait and see. At round 2, we had a couple more injuries. Jai Roberts has a right forearm fracture that required surgery. It looked like he did 2 mid-shaft fractures to the radius and ulna. So he's out for the season. And Thomas Ravenhorst did a big one. He's done 7 rib fractures, multiple transverse process fractures of his vertebrae, fractured a collarbone, and also had some bleeding on his lungs, which I'm not surprised about with those rib fractures. With that many rib fractures, one of them was bound to poke into his rib and cause a bit of a cut to that, and then obviously the bleeding, but also he's impacted his chest heavily to get those 7 rib fractures. Likely he's just done a big bruise to that lung that's then caused some bleeding inside. So not surprised that there's, the lung got involved there as well. Lucky to not have a punctured lung or worse. So hopefully Thomas will be able to get back on the mend, but that will be his season for Oz Supercross done. He won't be able to recover from those multiple injuries in time. Rib fractures are notorious for being painful all the way until the last minute when they finally united back together. So he will be out for a little while. He won't be able to get through that one. So that's our list for the Oz Supercross as well. A few injuries already taking guys out, and we don't have heaps of people in this Oz Supercross series. It's the first time back in a couple of years. So not many people already on the gates. We're losing people already. Hopefully we can have enough guys to make it through and not too many more injuries for round 3 and round 4. But we'll have to see how it all goes. And that's the emergency department. So let's take a quick break again, and we'll be back with Dave's diatribe.
I'm Brighton Carroll, riding for Team TCD, and you're listening to the AlwaysMoto podcast.
All right, guys and girls, we're back again. We're still going. The show's still rocking along. Thanks for listening to the AlwaysMoto podcast. Let's jump into Dave's diatribe. This is Dave's diatribe. What's a diatribe? A diatribe is a forceful and bitter attack against someone or something. So keep your head down. You might be next. You could be next. This is this is not a one-time deal. You could get multiple attacks. We'll have to wait and see. But this one's a good one for you guys and girls at home that might not be aware of these things when you're at a stadium. So we're at Marvel Stadium for that Melbourne round of World Supercross. Had to get into the venue super early to meet, get in there as a media pass and talk to some of the guys and girls before the event started, which was okay. Managed to sort that out. Obviously, we're going to hang around a lot later for post-race interviews, just get more gossip to see what's going on and check out all the injuries that have happened. So we're going to be in that stadium much later than the crowd, and obviously the crowd is able to go out through the normal exits out of the stadium for all the crowd entries and that side of things. But when you're in the pit area, which is in the car park of this Marvel Stadium, everything gets locked at a certain time for the normal exits. And so I walked into this venue because I had a hotel just across the road next to Southern Cross Station, which was awesome. But to get out of the venue, I think I left the venue or tried to leave the venue at about midnight. So it was about, an hour and a half, 2 hours after the event finished. So obviously everything was locked, right? So I try to get out of the stadium. I go out to where I came into it. I go up this staircase, out to the level where I'm supposed to walk out. Fucking door's locked. Great. Can't get it open. No intercoms, nothing. All right, so I go back down, go back through the car park a bit towards where the pits are, spot a security guard. I go, mate, how the frick do I get out of this place on foot? He goes, the only way out at the moment is you got to walk out this driveway. I'm like, all right, sweet. So I go walk down that driveway, which is obviously where all the team trucks and stuff are driving out. Yeah, it goes straight out onto like a highway. There's no footpath. There's no, nothing for pedestrians. It's a shit show in the middle of the night in Melbourne. And I'm like, that seems dangerous. I don't think I want to walk out there. So I walk back in, talk to the guard. He goes, oh, mate, there's nobody else here. This is the only way out. You're going to have to do it. I'm like, are you fucking serious? I've just had an awesome night in WSX. I'm tired as shit at this point. And you're going to make me walk out onto a bloody highway and cross something that I don't think I can cross because there's a railway line on the other side. So it's not like I can just cross the road and then find another footpath. There's a fence, for the railway line on one side and there's the stadium on the other side with no footpath. So luckily I spotted that there's a decently wide median strip. So I just crossed into the middle of the road, which is even better. I'm in the middle of the road now. Walking down this median strip. It's all fucking grass, mind you, so it's muddy as hell because it's been raining in Melbourne most of the time we're there. So I'm walking through all this mud, managed to get to an intersection, cut across, finally managed to walk back all the way to where I started from to get up onto the overhead platform that went across the train line and over this highway that I was walking along. But man, You guys have got to have a better exit strategy for all the people that have walked, the media that have walked in there, that are stuck in there till later. Well, not stuck in there, but we're in there till later with the riders trying to get content. Help us get out of the damn venue, people. It was rather dangerous, to be honest. Anyway, I'm done now. That we survived it. That's Dave's diatribe for this week. That was a good one. Like I said, I'm a bit pissed about that. But anyway, we know for next time I've got to make a better exit strategy. All right, we've got a new segment this week that we're going to talk about, and it's an industry sneak peek or whispers. We're going to call it industry whispers. Let's see if I hit the right button here. This is industry whispers. Wait, should I have told you that? Keep this one on the download, guys and girls. This is some information that you might not know about at all, and they might not want you to know it either. So we were in the pits at World Supercross. I was getting set up early in the morning. It was about 10 o'clock, I think it was, that I rocked in there. I was sitting down the end. They had, I'm surprised at a motocross event, but they had a private cafe sort of thing set up for the pit crew there. So I was sitting there at some of the tables just grabbing out my gear so that I could, take photos, do some interviews, whatnot. And I look over and I'm like, hey, I know that bloke. It's the Stark guys from Barcelona that I went over and did the Stark introduction with. It's Seb Tortelli and it's Ben, the marketing guy. And I'm like, hey, wonder what they're doing here. So I managed to talk to them later on in the day. Yep, they were over having some chats with the World Supercross guys. No specifics on what they were trying to do, and they're still not going to be out and about in a racing sense in 2023. But I got the feeling that they had something in the works for 2024. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there with the Stark guys and World Supercross, if they're trying to get some sort of, rule amendment to allow them to compete in the World Supercross class, or what they're trying to do. But yeah, they were definitely there in the pits at World Supercross, having a meeting with the World Supercross guys and girls to see about, potentially how they might be able to work together in the future. So it'd be interesting to see what that comes about. But yeah, like I said, this is an industry whisper, so keep that one on the down low. All right, guys and girls, let's jump into the interview now we've got with Conor Tierney. He's had a bad crash and dislocated a hip, which is quite painful. But let's have a listen to what he has to say now.